Just two conscious guys talking, where conscious male leaders come together and have a discussion that is deep, that is nourishing, that allows us to see the illumination of consciousness that's unfolding progressively for men that are waking up in the world, and where you can get insights on your own awakening as a man, and also for amazing women that want to learn more about men's challenges and struggles that have created some of the dysfunction we've seen within men in its society, often called, quote unquote, the patriarchy and other terms. What created it? What is the genesis of it all? What can we do about it today to empower men to be all that they're meant to be and to support the awakening of consciousness for men and women and all? Eric, I'm so grateful to be with you. It's actually been years. It's so funny. It never seems like it's been that long, but it's been 2-3 years or something like that since we had a conversation, and I'm just glad to be with you today.
You too, brother. Yeah, I mean, time is warped, even just in the world in general recently, but it can always be very strange, but it's very, very strange the last few years.
Yeah, it really is. It's interesting. Yeah, we are like as men and women and everybody, but everybody talks about this as the Great Awakening time. What's your take on that? Seeing as where we started, I'm like, I want to just start there. I know you got a lot to say about that, I'm sure, but let's talk about that briefly. Is this really a Great Awakening time, or is that just another delusion, another idea? Yeah, this is the Great Awakening.
I would say it's both. You know, it can be a delusion, and certainly that specific term is being used by certain groups that I think there is a bit of delusional type thinking. And I don't mean that judgmentally, just thinking that isn't necessarily based on any facts or evidence. Let's just put it that way. But I do think we're in a very intense and powerful time. I've even gone so far as to say we are in an apocalypse, based on the real meaning of the apocalypse, which means to take the lid off or to reveal what has been hidden. And there's been several of these, obviously throughout history, and they don't always become a great awakening. Sometimes they become a great asleepening, a great endarkening, right? And so just because we're in really, really interesting, difficult, high energetic or low energetic times doesn't guarantee we'll awaken. Sometimes we have, and sometimes, and you can see the birth of civil rights and democracies throughout history and evolving through great awakenings. And sometimes we haven't, and you get a dark ages, and then you get an enlightenment. And then that enlightenment turns to another form of in darkening and entombment and trapped in concepts of life. And then somebody has to come along and shatter that tomb and roll away the stone and resurrect life again. And that just keeps happening. You get the opportunity, like in Europe, and after the World War I, and then instead you get a Hitler, a kind of environment that gives rise to conspiracies and authoritarianism, and people so weakened without any leadership to understand that is breaking them down and cracking them open is actually creating an opportunity. But instead, with you could say it's the Antichrist energy or that kind of energy, you can turn that into an environment that gives rise to authoritarianism, tyranny, Hitler's, and on and on and on. So, and then I think it's important to understand that, and we see the confluence of all those things happening in our world right now. So there is the possibility of a real awakening, of a new renaissance, of a new enlightenment, and of a new level of democracy and rights and freedoms and all of that, because it's happened before. But there's also the possibility of conspiracies and polarization and shadow dancing and projections to such an extent, because there's a bit of a lack of real leadership, that we go the other way for a while. And so that's all a bit available. So I'm glad you're talking about it and doing it, because what will make the difference is if enough of us take it seriously enough to make sure that the Great Awakening is happening with us. Because that's the piece, is that there is the macro, and no matter what's going on in the world, there have been great awakenings in individuals all the time. There were great awakenings during the Dark Ages for individuals, and those seeds planted the seeds for the next great awakening, right? So that's, I think, what matters most is, are we going to embrace our personal opportunity? And we have plenty of opportunities, to awaken every day. And it doesn't have to always be a great awakening. It can just be a little awakening. Starbucks runs out of whipped cream and we're pissed off. Okay, here's an opportunity for a little awakening. Somebody cuts us off in the freeway. We lose our job. We don't get that client, whatever. There's opportunities all the time. And many of us right now are going through much more, intense personal experiences. So there's plenty of opportunity for it.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, that's really well said. I'm glad I asked. You had a lot of cool stuff to share in there, things that I wouldn't have fully, articulated that way myself, or understood entirely the way you understand history and whatnot like that. So that is true. When I think about it, though, yeah, it's always a dance, right? Everything's going to hell. We've got all these problems going on, and then there's these great things that birth out of it, and it's just it's constantly a dance. I totally see that. So yeah, and there's this dance too. Something, because you said, I just had, I have to share this because it was so fun. It's like you said, yeah, here we are, two white guys, we're going to talk and we're going to save the world, right?
Two white guys save the world. Yeah.
I thought that was such a fun place to start, like, our conversation before we got on. And it's like, yeah, there's a lot going on, like, because this is a lot of the conversation here is to be generated around what's going on with men during these times, like, there's like, yeah, the patriarchy and men dominate, no question, right? Like, there's no denying what's been going on, 1,000,000%, and all the things we could get into about that, right?
Yeah.
At the same time, we've got, men committing more suicide than ever before. We've got more drug use by men than ever before. We've got more men's health issues than ever before. We've got, I think you probably know even more of them than I do. Like, we just keep going, right? And then we got more of this for men, and okay, yeah, men are doing really great, right? The men are doing good. So I really appreciate that. There's a lot of very wise people out there that are understanding, like, men are going through a lot. Maybe this idea we've reigned and we've had it so good all the time, and
Right.
well, yes and no. I mean,
it's our turn to sit at the back of the bus,
Yeah, you sit in the back of the bus.
Right.
So I'm wondering how we could start even with today. Like, how does that impact you? You seem to be more of an activist. I know these are labels, but you seem more of an activist sort of energy. Like, yes, let's get behind this progressive kind of vision for humanity. And you just seem that way. I don't know if that's even true. That's just the vibe I get from you. And so what do you think's really happening with this big shift with men right now? Like, coming back.
There's a lot of things happening. I mean, one thing I will agree, there is a crisis with men. It didn't just start, but it's become starker and starker, right? As like anything. And it's not just white men. I mean, there's been a crisis with Black men for a long, long time, incarceration and prison and lack of education and, in family structures and all of that. So you could say on one level, and there's also been a crisis of white men in lower income and Appalachian areas and all these different parts of the country, of the US and around the world. So again, it's like the Great Awakening idea. There's the large macro movements in history. And then there's the same movements are happening. The fractals of those movements are happening all around the world all the time. There's always a Great Awakening. There's always a Dark Ages. There's always a Renaissance. There's always a crisis with white men, Black men, women, people of color, disenfranchised. It's always happening all over throughout all time, kind of a thing, right? And then there's these, and then as those get worked through culturally, country, area, family, community, they then arrive, they elevate, and that becomes a larger part of the macro until eventually it changes the macro, right? There were women breaking free during the time of Jesus, but it took a while before that conversation rose to the rights of the women's suffragist movement and the freedom of women. And there were, et cetera, Black people breaking free and even enslaving people. And then eventually that conversation rose to civil rights and on and on and on. So the same thing is true with men. So that's just an important thing for us to understand, that all the conversations are going on all the time. All the transformative opportunities in individual lives and collective lives. And then it all eventually rises to the level of the macro trends. But there is a macro trend right now. And it's partly the reflex of, because of all these micro trends and medium to micro of rights of women and rights of people of color and people that have been disenfranchised, and all really good and important and necessary evolution, so that there's a level playing field and freedom for people and all that. But then we just have a tendency to shoot to overcompensate. We have a tendency to start with a good idea and turn it into some kind of polarization, a new polarity, or a new industrial complex. Jesus had some good ideas, but then they had to turn it into the religious industrial complex. And so it went too far. And, medicine has really good ideas, and then it turned into the industrial, medical, pharmaceutical complex. And once that happens, it's actually no longer about the initial revelation. It's not about the life force that gave birth to it. It's now about serving the structure and keeping the machine alive. And that happens with all movements. And so you look at the Me Too, or you look at Black Lives Matter, or you look at the liberal progressive movements, all beautiful revelations, insights, truth that eventually have become or are becoming industrial complexes, where it's more about keeping the structure alive. I'm not saying there's not people inside that are still awake and still serving the real truth and the real life force of it, but once it becomes a structure and an organization. Now, here's what's ironic. Organization, structure is the masculine.
Yeah.
And the life force is the feminine. The pure, raw, chaotic life force is the feminine. The structure that holds it is the masculine. And the irony is, even in all these progressive movements, what eventually happens is they get caught by the same patriarchy or hierarchy, or serving the masculine, i.e. order and structure, rather than serving the moment by moment raw life force that is giving birth over and over again, which is the feminine. And this is what Jesus was doing. Everybody was already entombed. Everybody was already stuck in all these structures, family, religion, marketplace, commerce, all that. And he came along. People think that's a story about one guy getting entombed and then breaking free. It's a story about how everybody was already dead and in a tomb in these structures, and he came and set them free. And then they had to kill him because, everybody wants to hold on to their structures. So it's the same thing right now. And so what we have to be willing to do is have the conversations like you're having, where we're willing to recognize the conversation is nuanced, and that no one side has the answer, because that there's a truth. It's not your truth and my truth. There's the truth, and the truth is infinite. So you can never capture it in any structure. So you have to keep serving the truth, serving where it's alive, where, and being extremely humble, right? So I think that's the kind of bigger conversation we need to keep having, so that we can touch that revelation of freedom and rights and all that, but not get entrenched in any one side. But that's what's happening. And it happens again and again. And as a result, it's polarized. And now, men toxic, men bad, masculinity toxic and bad, and especially white or white European masculinity. And the obvious to any intellectually honest, really thoughtful individual, it's obvious that that's a bad idea. Because now what's going to happen? You're just being racist, and I don't know what the word is, the opposite of misogynist, which misogyny is, against women. You're just being anti-male, anti-white. You're just being racist and judgmental and you're doing all the things that you say are wrong towards one side, you're just doing it to the other. And you're just creating the conditions for another backlash, for that energy. Just like one of the reasons Trump was so successful was a lot of this woke kind of stuff. It made so many people feel so disenfranchised that he came along, and it's exactly what happened during the time of Hitler. They felt so disenfranchised, and he came along and spoke to those places in them where they felt judged and cut off and cut away. And so, and I'm not, correlating Trump and Hitler, just to be clear. But I'm just saying that same thing. We're setting the stage for another swing of the polarity where white men are going to try to burn the house down. Or they're going to just give up. And you want to see a world where the masculine is not strong and vibrant and potent. That's a world of chaos. That's a world of utter chaos. And so the white man and men built a lot of the structures of the world, and they'll tear them all down or blow them all up if we don't recognize there's a crisis. And it doesn't mean keep them in power. It doesn't mean not empower women and all the rest of the rainbow, right? It just means that you can't cut out a fundamental part of life and think life's still going to work. In the same way that you can't go, well, that liver of mine is sure a pain in the ass. Whenever I drink, it causes me problems,
Cut the damn thing out. Get it out of here.
I'm going to get rid of that liver. I'm anti-liver. I'm pro-heart lungs, but anti-liver. It just doesn't work. We're all part of one body. We're all part of one. And all the judgment and all the fear we have of the masculine is our own shadow, including inside of men, because one of the reasons a man becomes toxic is he either has a lot of shame and fear about his inner feminine and other dimensions of the masculine, that he's rejected those and repressed and sublimated those. And then all that energy shows up in a destructive form, in unsustainable forms and structures. It shows up in rigidity and too much order or too much control, right? Or when a man is feeling shamed for his masculinity and his strength and the power and the provider and the protector, he doesn't have the strength and stability to create enough order and control to manage the feminine life force. And then you have a lot of women that are like, where are all the good men and the strong men? Well, you've been telling them they're toxic and bad, and so that's where they are. Or in this society, and then you have men that struggle. And by the way, I'm speaking in men and women, but this is really masculine and feminine. And because if a feminine has judgment about the masculine and the men, she's going to suffer with her own masculine. She's going to struggle with her own ability to have power and to have structure and to have order and to have control in her own life. And so it's not, you can't escape it. If you judge, you are judged by that judgment. If you cut away, you are cut apart and cut away from that part of you. So we're not really in the world is in us. And we have to love the enemy, and the enemy is in our own household. And then you find freedom. You win the war within yourself, which is the only place it's happening. And then you project that harmony and that new perspective into the world. That's how the world changes. And that's the only way the world has ever changed throughout history, is when an individual had the courage to not play by the status quo, to not just hate white people like Malcolm X before his conversion, but like Dr. King, and understand love and unity and oneness and being to the mountaintop, And that was why he was able to move the needle so much, right? And on throughout all the great movements, that's always been the case. So, because that individual had the Great Awakening, and they were able to hold the energy of that expanded space in a world that was trying to close the walls in a myopic, status quo, polarized political, social norm. And those individuals had the courage not to do that. Whether it's Gandhi, Dr. King, Nelson Mandela, people in the women's suffragist movement, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what I think is happening. And I think that we have to have the courage. I also think this whole thing about, it's an interesting irony, because part of that larger conversation in the woke culture is, by the way, I came from total left, radical left, liberal kind of mindset, but now I don't have when you said I'm like an activist, I don't have a side, and I even joke and say, you need a left and a right wing to fly, right? So I want both wings, right? And is that in this woke culture thing where now there's the whole trans movement, and I have a very intimate relationship with gay and trans, my children were that and all that. So I know a lot about this very up and close, but it's all about, I can be self-identifying, and that we're fluid and that we can be anything. And that's really a little subjective understanding of the spiritual truth of being, which is that we are neither male nor female, white nor black. We are, again, the whole of it is in us. And so it's an interesting, ironic, and contradictory thing that we would make that kind of judgment or discernment, because as a white man, as a human being playing the part of a white man, what I know to be true spiritually is that doesn't define me. Just like I know that really powerful Black men and Black women and Black people, they know they are not defined by their Blackness. They're not disregarding it. It's beautiful. It's the lampshade they're wearing over the light of their being. It's the unique costume they're wearing in this divine drama they're playing a part in. So it's an awesome part, and it's a wonderful lampshade, but I'm not the lampshade, and I'm not the costume or the mask. I'm the light. I'm the divine actor. I'm the divine presence. And so I won't be limited by those labels any more than any Black or woman or Asian or Latino or Latinx or trans or gay. They don't want to be limited by those labels. Why would we want to then limit ourselves by those labels? And why would they want anybody to limit themselves by those labels? Right. And they don't, not in their heart of hearts.
Right.
But that's where we get lost. We don't realize that we're like, I won't be limited by my color or sexual preference or sexual orientation, but I'm going to limit you by that.
Right.
You're white, you're male, you're a white male, cisgender, hetero. I mean, how many labels are you going to put on somebody, right? By the end of that sentence, you're like, don't label me and limit me by labels. And you just gave me like 7,
Right.
I don't even know what half of those mean. Right. And that again, and this is a controversial conversation. I could see people listening to a piece of this and going, yeah, of course you can say that as a white male. Right. But I hope in context, it's understanding that in the same way, I'm not saying, well, you can't do that because you're this kind of person, or you shouldn't have a right to speak out or speak up or be self-expressed because you're just a woman, or you're just gay, straight, trans, Black, Asian, whatever. In the same way, it has to be the truth about all of us. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't disregard the fact that we, depending on who you are, we have to still recognize we're creating the space for more of the rainbow, for more of the voices to be heard, right? Like I know personally, as you know, I can talk a lot.
Yeah.
So
you actually are talking more than anybody so far, but you have a lot, you have really amazing things to share. You really do. And I
And what I
think,
was going to say real quick is just as a result of that, like if I'm with my wife or a group of individuals, and sometimes it can be women, but it can be men, and they're not using their full voice and expression, I will step back and be quiet more, because there it's for some people, and as we're evolving, they need support to have a space to step into themselves more. And I'm saying that to say that it's right that we keep creating, the level playing field where people in all these different quote unquote groups have more opportunity to have their voice and have their expression and be heard and all of that. So I want to be very clear. It's not like it's always got to be equal. Sometimes you have to let somebody who's been at the back of the line go to the front. Sometimes you have to, realize, we've all eaten, gotten seconds already, and you haven't even gotten your first portion. Go ahead. Like, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I'm just saying in the larger consciousness, we can't achieve that kind of equity without making sure we don't take it away from anybody else.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So thank you. That's why I'm like, keep going. This is good stuff, Derek. So yeah, I really loved everything because I probably, like that's why I said I don't know if you're an activist sort of energy for sure or not. I sense that you have been that, so that's probably what I'm picking up on, and that you have a more maybe balanced perspective a little bit, more over the years, more nuanced or whatever, right? So that's really cool. So I think that's where we need to be rather than to some extreme or another. I think that's the enlightened perspective personally, but everybody is where they are. I'm not going to make it wrong. So everybody is wherever they are. We're here just as a voice to listen to, and you're listening to us for a reason, for whatever the reasons are. Hopefully it's helpful to you, so that was great. Like, you gave me way more than I thought I was even asking for. So that's wonderful. So
you're like, that was the first 10 questions I was going to ask. Okay. That out.
well, I mean, it just went beyond any questions I had actually. So, but when we look at like, the what's going on with men, like I always say, okay, let's talk about down with the patriarchy. First of all, what created the patriarchy, and I know you've got a lot to share with that. It could be another 20 minutes easy, but and I want to know, what do you feel like one of the, I'll just say, one of the repetitive themes always when I talk to the guys on here, the big leaders or whatever, and all these different men that I've had on, or with men movements and everybody in between, they all say like one of the number one issues men have had is the feeling like they have the ability to share their emotions, to share their vulnerability, because if you do, you're a sissy. If you do, you're going to get eaten up by all the guys. They're going to be like, yeah, you're a piece of crap or whatever. Bam, 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 bully you or whatever. And that's what happens. You're a kid. If you don't show you're strong enough, then the other guys tend to get in there and bang, 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 especially when we grew up more. So it seems.
But not only guys, but women don't like you either.
True.
And that's like I was going to say, you mentioned an interesting thing about, where did the patriarchy come from? And it didn't come from men. It came from evolution of the masculine and the feminine. And if you understand evolution, you understand that men did not have the power, or the masculine of the species, the feminine of the species, or the female of the species, they did the choosing. And so whether your gene continued to exist was up to the female of the species. And the masculine, or the male species, had to be the best protector, provider, and performer. So in other words, the male species that could do the best dance, and I mean literally like a dance sometimes, with the most colorful feathers, and also had the most resources, and was also able to fight back all the other males and prove the protector role, that was the one the female of the species was most likely to pick, especially the highest level female of the species, which also meant the genes would do even better and prosper even more. So it doesn't mean there wasn't some choice back and forth, because if you're the alpha male, you have some choice versus which female chooses you, if that makes sense. But there's still a hierarchy on both sides. But the point is, evolutionarily, as a need for survival, the male of the species had to learn how to be the strongest, the smartest, and conquer and achieve and acquire at the highest levels in order to get. And that wasn't like a guy going, let's see what's going to get the best college, or where am I going to make the most money, or how can I get the most babes. That's what it eventually evolved to in terms of our human stories. Let me build the biggest building and have the biggest weapons. But it's just a normal evolutionary response. And because the female needs the masculine male species to protect her and to protect the young and to provide food and all of those basic things. So then as that evolves into the human species, it's the exact same thing, except very rarely does any male or woman, man or woman, ever have any clue that's what's going on inside of them. They think they're making all these choices to be a good man and have a good family, and a woman's picking a good man. It's all evolutionary.
Yeah.
And it's all unconscious.
Laid it all out for us, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's all unconscious. It's not even our it's like it's in our genetics.
Right.
And we need to educate ourselves and have compassion for ourselves, and not try to cut off those parts of us or judge them and shame them, but embrace them, embrace the monster and tame the beast, embrace the full potential that as the masculine species, I can conquer all of Earth, but then master that energy so that it's only used in service of love and in service of the divine feminine, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But don't say all that power to destroy is bad, or all that power to protect or provide or conquer or achieve is bad. Say, you've got all that power. Now master it and put it in service of the feminine, the divine feminine. And likewise for the divine feminine, we're not talking about women, but there's a whole same conversation about the potential of the divine high priestess energy and the Kali energy. And the feminine is like just massive. Yeah. And most women, it gets sublimated or it gets shrunk. And then the other piece about the masculine and feminine is the reason oppression of the feminine has happened throughout the ages is because of this ignorance, and because the male of the species knows that the feminine is really the one holding the power of my survival. And so and that if she's let loose to her full power, she could annihilate every structure on Earth, because that's what happens when you unleash pure chaos, pure life force, and it's not contained, like a nuclear bomb going off. That's how powerful the feminine is. It's pure electricity, and it will annihilate every structure, which is the masculine. And so the masculine doesn't understand that that's the role. I have to be annihilated again and again by the divine feminine so I could form an even better structure, an even bigger structure, an even more beautiful and complex structure in this divine dance of chaos and order, of death and rebirth. That's all what's happening in creation. And that plays out in the masculine and feminine. But then with all the ignorance of this, it plays out as all the stories and the judgments we've created on top of that evolutionarily and spiritual creation story. And so that has to happen. And that happened in the mystery schools to some degree. And there's some pockets where people are really understanding what is the masculine power and the feminine power and the dance between the two, and that it's happening within us. And then it plays out when we interact with others. But that's, and then the other thing about racism and the way we are, the white male has been a seeming, and it's not just the white males that have been racist, everybody's racist, but because they had the power, they could wield that racist stick more broadly. But if, again, evolutionarily, it comes from a core idea, and not even a wrong idea, that something that is other than me, other than my tribe, other than my family, would kill me, not just by a spear, but with viruses and bacteria and germs, because a tribe would show up. And that's what happened when Columbus came to America and got everybody sick. And so evolutionarily, we had to learn to other things and make things other, make them potentially dirty, make them potentially dangerous, until we knew for sure, because otherwise it would be the death of our entire family and our gene pool and all of that. Again, that's evolutionary. But then it led to structures in the world that systematized othering. And then it led to the story of why we're othering and why we should, and then why that color is less than. But it was all based on this evolutionary impulse that we were ignorant of. And so again, when we understand that, when we understand that that's a healthy thing, to make sure you don't get a germ or a bacteria or something that could kill you. But now that doesn't have anything to do with the color of your skin or your gender, and on and on and on. You can see, if you take this conversation and we get the understanding, we can start to let go of, just like in the days when not indigenous, but tribal desert dwellers, they made up all these stories about the gods, the sun god and the moon god and the rain god, because they didn't understand there was physics. Mm-hmm. We've done the same thing with evolution. We don't understand there's all these evolutionary things. So we've made up mythologies about men and women and black and white, and that's borne out racism and misogyny and otherness, but it's all just mythology. In the same way that we said the sun would go to sleep at night and then it would wake up in the morning, and that the earth was flat. And those were all mythologies based on an ignorance of science and physics. And these are mythologies based on an ignorance of evolution and the deeper spiritual unfoldment that's trying to happen.
Right. Yeah. A lot there. A lot on the bone there, Derek. It's awesome. Yeah. I appreciate that. Let's talk more personally now that we got really in the big wide picture, really amazingly. It's a masterpiece of great things in there. So what I'd love to do is get more personal to you and your journey as a man. So what things did you deal with, growing up? For me, I was like 70s, 80s kid. And I think it depends on your age too, a little bit, like what different things, we've all,
sure.
But without me getting into mine right now, but like what things did you run into? What were the ideas? This is what it means to be a man and things like that. Did you have that sort of thing going on when you were growing up, or what was going on for you with male stereotypes?
Absolutely. I mean, it wasn't so much like anybody said specifically, maybe, at least I don't remember, this is what it's like to be a man, but I certainly got the message and the model as I grew up. And my mom and dad fought a lot, and then they got divorced, and then other men coming through our lives and other marriages and different things like that. And I mean, my mom and I had an experience of my dad who was, kind of scary, kind of big, and didn't understand me. And I used to joke, my artist heart and his business head, they were like two ships that passed in the night. He thought Pearl Jam was something you put on toast, and I thought Dow Jones was his business partner, Mr. Jones. And so I wanted, and I didn't feel safe around him, but I wanted to. And so I had a lot of judgments about being a man is bad, or it's aggressive and it's scary. And I saw him hurt my mom, or so I thought, in the way that I perceived it. And I heard from my mom, men, and they're bad and they're aggressive. And then was also told, my mom was really mad at me. You're just like your father. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, I'm a bad man. And And I don't want to be a bad man. I don't want to be just like my father. Although on another side of me, mostly shadow, I did want to be like him, you know. And then I saw the more successful he got as a man, the more pain it caused our family, and on and on and on. So success, painful and bad, but I want that. Being a man, painful and bad, but I want that. Being strong, painful and bad, but I want that. And it was really confusing. And I tended to go more towards the feminine. And mostly being raised by my mom, and my sister was there, you know, that made sense. But I became the nice guy. I became the knight in shining armor. I became the guy that would prove I'm not a bad man. And so I'm going to be a nice man and a good man and a generous man and a helpful man. But then a part of me split off, and I became a selfish man because I was stepping on myself. I had to keep getting away from people and finding a way to kind of create my own space to meet my real deeper needs. And I was afraid if I really trusted, I was going to be smothered, right? Because I didn't have the masculine. I didn't have a backbone. I had a wishbone. And so all of that, you know, combined to make it a very challenging journey. You know, I had friends who were in sports and they seemed like real men and strong men. And I felt, and they would call me a non-athletic pud. And I just felt weak. And then I'd go hang out with my friends and his girlfriend. And so I'd be the third wheel. And I just felt weak and impotent. But I was the nice guy, you know. So that was the beginnings of my journey, right? And then as I went through puberty and stuff, I was lucky to, you know, be handsome enough that even though I was kind of weak and kind of scared, women were attracted to me. If it wasn't for that, I might have been doomed. But it at least gave me some opportunities, you know, to start stepping into the ring. And then I, you know, in my 20s, I had a near-death experience and began this journey of really waking up and seeing the masculine and the feminine and understanding those polarities more. And then also understanding that all that judgment and projection I had about men and about women were smothering, women were needy, men were aggressive, men were bad. I was able to recognize that all that was shadow. And I was able to embrace one by one my inner asshole, my inner control monster, my inner monster, period, my inner weak man, my inner whatever, murderer, killer, you know, all those qualities. And I went, and then I was married for over 20 years and went through that experience. That was a workshop to really work that. And then by the end of that, I saw that all the things I was still fighting about in that relationship were arguments I hadn't won within myself. And I realized I was just still arguing with parts of me. I couldn't accept love and really hold parts of me. And I wanted my wife to validate them. And there was no amount of doing good or not doing that was ever going to get her to change her perspective. I had to do that work. And when I did that work and fell in love with those parts of me that I didn't think were good or acceptable or whatever, the contract between me and my wife was completed. And then I ended up divorcing and being in a relationship now where for many, many years where it's the balance and the harmony of the masculine and the feminine and the strength and the power that I feel and the confidence but it's not rigid, you know, all of that, you know, I'm still on the journey very much so. But there's a lot that has been reintegrated, you know. At first we're kind of a little interesting dysfunctional combination of elements, some that are operable and helpful, some that are shadow and dysfunction. And eventually you got to kind of lay them out and look at all the pieces, and then one by one, and then all the labels that have been put on them, and then peel off the label and get to know them for real, and then put them back in one by one, piece by piece, like taking your engine apart in your car and laying it all out on the thing, and then going, what is that? You know, and so that's kind of the journey that I've been on, and I know you've been on too. But it's you know, it's been a real journey. It's taken me 25 plus years to really begin to feel really good about myself as a man, really confident, undeniably loving and appreciating and respecting myself. It's taken decades of hard work.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
No lack of suffering and challenge.
yeah, I mean, I relate to the nice guy thing. Definitely, I played that role a lot, and at some point, I think we all I'll end up playing all these roles still at some level, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Back in the nice guy role, all right.
Yeah.
But it's a constant pattern is where maybe I'm pretty sure that's broken through as like a pattern of just being that nice guy. I'm more like, okay, I mean, I'm feeling fierce. I'm going to be fierce. It feels like it's appropriate right now. Whatever that energy is that comes through, because before, when I was the nice guy, what was inside me, like a lot of guys I've talked to over the years, and I'm sure you have too, is the Incredible Hulk, right? It's like, oh, I'll kill everyone.
Exactly.
Destroy everything, and
Yeah.
so although, I seem like this quiet guy,
A
this,
lot of shame about anger and all of
yeah,
that,
yeah,
yeah, and
yeah.
fear.
Yeah, and so, and all this energy is underneath, and nobody would have a clue, because I was never showing any of it. But then, yeah, I mean, so I would literally be scared to death to go to a men's retreat where they would confront such things, because I don't know, I might want to kill everybody there. I don't know, like I can't do that, and I never did go to one of those kind of deals, but now I know if I actually wanted to go to one of those things, I wouldn't be worried about that anymore. I'd be like, okay, we're doing whatever we're doing. All right, we're all naked. We're all doing this or that. All the things they do, those things. I'm like, okay, we're up at 2 a.m, whatever. Okay, whatever. I mean, I
Exactly.
just want to be a little bit more like whatever, and observant of the situation rather than like, oh, I'll kill you all. Don't do this to me. But yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I totally understand like what you're saying with that nice guy act and shelving, because I always said things like I'll never be like these guys, right? Like when my sister getting pregnant, not even know who the father is. I'm like, oh my God, that's so horrible. I will not be that kind of man, right? And then you keep shutting
Yeah.
down all these different aspects of yourself and not dating like forever because I don't want to even get close having any of that sort of thing happen. Overcompensating, like you were talking about earlier with things like let's overshoot it. Let's not even date any girls, for a long, long time. And so, yeah, so many ways that we try to manage that then and deal with that. So it's great that there are so many different options opening up and for men to be able to move through these things. I mean, what are some of the things that have helped you the most to move through these sort of issues?
I was also going to say, the thing about, yeah, you've heard of incels, involuntary celibate men. That's another example of the shadow, where the men are cutting themselves off from literally self-castrating in a way,
Yeah.
not literally, but, and then if you look at, all this, so many, if not almost all, or a great majority of the school shootings or of just shootings in general, and there's some kind of big story about being rejected by a woman, or maybe if they were gay, it's a man, but usually it's a woman. And you look at the terrorists and it's all about, you're going to get 70 virgins or whatever. And if you've ever been in the Middle East and been around Sharia law, and the repression of sexuality is and the repression of the masculine sexuality and the women's sexuality. So you see in some of these most destructive things, it's the repression of these shadows. And to me, it's just so blatant and so obvious. And then you see, like in American culture, the repression of our masculine and feminine energies and sexuality. Every cheeseburger is being sold with sex now, or everybody's got a gun now. There's 400 million guns. So like, well, you think that has any connection to the repression of our masculinity and our femininity? Damn right it does.
Yeah.
And so that's like a bit of a macro trend, but we have an opportunity, if we're going to make a difference, don't just lobby for gun rights or women's rights. Make sure you're liberating yourself and having the courage. It takes way more fierceness and courage to liberate yourself in your conservative family or liberal family and be the full out man that you are in your liberal family, or the full out woman that you are in your conservative family, or the full out whatever, in a world where status quo rules the day, that takes way more courage than go lobbying Washington. I'm not saying that doesn't take courage and that we don't need that. I'm just saying the courage to liberate ourselves, to win the war in ourselves of racism and misogyny and anti-male and fear of these parts, that's the real war we want to be engaging in. And the only way to win it is with love, is meeting it with love and patience, compassion, understanding, moment by moment by moment. I got to hold that part of me. Okay, now I got to hold that part of me. Okay, I got to meet the deeper need of that part of me, which is my definition of love. Love is the force that meets the need of every seed in creation so that it can flower and bring forth more life. And so loving ourselves means I'm going to have the patience and the capacity and the compassion to really hear myself, to really see myself, to really hold myself, and to meet the deeper and often scary needs of myself. And then what happens is you get free, and then you can extend that freedom in the form of love and service to be in service of another person's flourishing and freedom. And if you try to do that before you're free, it's often activism, wounded healers, or just patriotism or some other political social movement that tends to create more pain and suffering down the road. So we must, number one, become free within ourselves. And I want to say the thing about, it's a very difficult and painful journey to really get free. And one of the things, whether it's the women or the disenfranchised or people of color as against white men, is they've suffered so much more. But that's not really true. And first of all, it's not even true in the monolith, but it's certainly not true with individual to individual. There are many people, whether women that have suffered this much, and a white guy, they're walking down the street who has suffered this much.
Right.
And there are many Black people that have suffered this much, and the white guy this much, or this much, and the white guy. So
right.
Individual to individual, you don't know another person's suffering.
Right.
And the truth is we're all suffering. And we're all suffering way more than we're willing to admit it. In most cases, we've just learned to cope, compensate, anesthetize, drug, eat, shop on top of, but we're suffering. And you can see it break out in all kinds of ways. But men, as you said at the very, very top of this, men are suffering. Men work some of the most dangerous jobs of anybody. Men kill themselves more often than anybody. They're at least more successful at it because they're men and they're willing to just take a gun to their head rather than a maybe more cautious way of trying to kill yourself. But, and again, the suffering of men tends to be taken out on the world because they're suffering, not because they're bad. Whereas the suffering of a woman tends to be taken out on herself.
Yeah.
And so that's just, again, the way the polarity operates, but it's still suffering. And so for both reasons, we need to understand that. And then we also, again, we have to understand you don't know any individual story. And, like when I was on a call not that long ago with a Black woman, a pastor or minister at a church, and another guy who's a Native American descent, and they're amazing people, and we were having all these awesome jams, so we decided to do it publicly. And I called out some of this stuff, and they're like, "Well, you as a white guy," and so I was like, "Oh, here we go."
Right.
And I called it out, and I said, "Well, a lot of people say nobody knows my experience. I mean, the level of tragedy and loss that I've gone through personally over just the last few years, let alone my life, would turn many, many people into a puddle on the ground."
Yeah. And
I won't go into all the specifics, but for people listening or watching or whatever, but I know the meaning of real tragedy and real suffering. And I know it in many ways: losing fortunes, losing children, losing families, like I just know it.
Right.
And so who gives a crap what color my skin is?
Right.
I'm a being who suffered, and so are you, and so are we all. And who cares about your gender or your sexual orientation? We're all spiritual beings and human beings, and we all equally deserve to be held and understood in our suffering and in our glory and our power. I think that, again, I'm not saying we don't have to give attention to specific needs that are rising, but we have to understand we're not a monolith, and everybody shares the universal understanding of rejection and prejudice and fear and pain and suffering. And maybe you have it more in this area than I do, and I have it more in this area than you do. Okay, so we'll talk about that, but we all have it. And any great leader or great master or great mystic that has come down the line has understood this, including the modern day ones like Dr. King and Mandela and Gandhi and all of that. And they didn't have any of this polarization and othering. And I mean, Dr. King even said, judge a person by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. So.
Yeah, totally. Wow. Well, time flies when we're having fun here, Derek, but we've had a lot of powerful things that you had to share. Yeah, I mean, it was so good. I just, unlike some of the guests I've had, I just felt like sitting back and just listening deeply to everything you had to say, because it was really, really wonderful things you had to share. And I'm very honored and grateful for you always. And I'm grateful for
likewise
you had to share today. So thank you so much for the conversation today, Derek.
Yeah, thank you for having it, because it takes courage to have it. And I'm really honored to be here.
Thank you for listening in to Just Two Conscious Guys Talking, where our mission is to impact millions of men ultimately to deepen their awakening by examining their consciousness of what's been unfolding for them with male stereotypes and programming that has allowed them to have opportunities to evolve during these times. It's an exciting time to bring more love to men and women around the world, and we are grateful for you tuning in today. Feel free to share this episode and keep tuning in, and also look in the show notes for a link to get notifications of future episodes. Until the next time, everyone, goodbye for now.